And welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a daily podcast in which we dig in deep to analyze the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time. I'm Andy Nelson from thenextreel.com.
And I'm Pete Wright, also from The Next Reel.
We are, of course, talking about Jon Favreau's 2008 film Iron Man, where all of this began. And joining us on the show today, we have our first guest. It is Ryan Dalton with Legible Scrawl. Hey, Ryan.
Hey, happy to be here.
Our first guest. Hallelujah. We need a chorus of cheers.
It's definitely nice to have another voice on the show, jumping in and chatting with us about Iron Man. What's your journey with Marvel and Iron Man in particular? Are you a fan of the comics?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially the Invincible Iron Man run, the Matt Fraction run. I was a huge fan of. I really bought into the whole Extremis storyline. I thought that was fun. I've been a nerd my whole life. I loved comics as a kid, kind of got away from them a little bit as a young adult. And then in my 20s, I made a friend who was basically a comic encyclopedia. And he introduced me to a little comic called Watchmen, which reignited my whole love for comics. And it's been a love affair ever since.
And what about the Marvel films? Have you always been like going and watching all the comic book films when they come out? And this was just like another one that became so much more?
I watch any comic book film I could get my hands on. I would usually give it a shot, even, during the dark times when we were not getting very good ones. And I would, my hope would always spring eternal. So I would go and I would watch. And when the Marvel movies started coming out, I remember when the first trailer for Iron Man hit, and even my non-nerd friends were like, what is this all about? And suddenly I was kind of the tour guide for non-nerds who's like, okay, this is who Tony Stark is, and this is why you should definitely see the movie with me. And for the first several Marvel movies, I was explaining a lot to a lot of friends. We've hit an interesting time now where that they don't need me to explain a lot anymore. Even my non-geek friends, it's funny how much Marvel knowledge they have. But yeah, that's how it all started for me.
Yeah, it's funny. It really has changed so much over the past couple decades. And it's interesting because, technically, Marvel had been making other films really recently, right before this. I mean, the Spider-Man films were right ahead of this. And it wasn't really the sense of the universe yet, though. It was just another comic book movie at the time. So it's funny thinking back on it now that, oh, here's Iron Man, just another Marvel comic book movie.
Yeah, and there used to be among the studios that bought the rights to these films, there was always this philosophy of, these shared universes, they would never work. These these heroes don't, like their whole tones don't mesh together. And there were nerds like me who would be furiously pointing to the comics and being like, it's worked there for 50 years and you say it doesn't work. And
right.
then along comes this revolutionary idea from Marvel that's like, hey, why don't we put on the movies what has worked for decades for the comics? And lo and behold, here's now everybody's trying to get their own shared universe.
Well, what's so funny about it, it's almost like there's a shared actors universe too, right? Because there was a part of that skepticism was there's no way we'll get all of these actors to be able to agree to share screen time with one another over the course of 2 hours. I'd like to introduce you to Infinity War. It is an amazing sort of awakening in the sort of agency model of creative talent.
Not only that, but coming on board just for like essentially a cameo, right? Where you just pop on for one scene,
right?
And it's an interesting journey, and it'll be a fun one. But I suppose I should narrow us down because today we're specifically talking about minute 6, which actually begins with essentially a PowerPoint presentation and ends with poor Rhodey abandoned at the podium. Rhodey. We finally get to meet Lieutenant Colonel James Rhodes, aka Rhodey, played by Terrence Howard. But before that, we're kind of still stuck in this slideshow, this exposition of who is Tony, and we start with the Forbes magazine cover, the new kid.
Yeah, I love this scene actually, just as a writer, because it's a very efficient way to let an audience who's unfamiliar with him know who he is without really telling him, look, we're just telling you who this guy is. Just sit there for a minute and we'll give you an outline. They wrapped it in this whole ceremony that's introducing Tony, and I thought it was a fairly elegant way to get some exposition in there.
Well, elegant and beautiful and patriotic, and it tells us all about Tony in the context of this company and then the sad trombone of Rhodey at the podium. It's just tonally, it's just perfect. Efficient is on the money.
Well, and it does give us a sense again of who this Tony guy is, right? We're getting this sense of the genius side of him. We've already kind of been introduced to a little bit of the playboy side that we saw back in the Humvee, but here we're left with poor Rhodey standing at the podium with no one to come up and accept this award. So it is kind of a moment that he's got here. Before we get to that, though, I have to point out, as it just cracks me up as I was looking at all these magazines again, to notice the typo on the cover of Forbes. Did either of you catch that?
Oh, I don't think so.
It says Tony Stark takes reins at 21. But it has Reigns spelled with a G. It's REIGNS, which, I mean, if they took, my only hunch is that the production design team that was putting this together might have initially had Tony Stark Reigns at 21, but then it doesn't fit right. Let's put takes Reigns without realizing that they had to take the G out.
Or just a really bad attempt at wordplay. I don't know.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm never not going to see that now.
I know.
Yeah, I can see him trying to make that case. It doesn't work. Yeah, exactly. I feel like I've seen this movie how many times? I've watched this minute how many times?
Welcome to the world of movies by minutes.
Yeah, it's kind of like the original Spider-Man movie. I never noticed for a few viewings in that alleyway fight scene when he's knocking the guys around. There's one spot where he throws these guys through some windows, and then 2 shots later, you look at the windows and they're whole again.
The magic
I never
window.
noticed until someone pointed it out. I was like, "Oh, a plague on your house for pointing that out." That's all I see now.
You're welcome. We really get to meet Obadiah Stane more in this minute. We saw him in the last minute as he's there's a cutaway of him watching this slideshow. But Obadiah Stane, I had no idea who he was. As I told Pete in the earlier minutes, I really was not an Iron Man reader. I didn't know anything about the comics, and actually, I didn't read the comics until really recently, just kind of getting prepped for this. And I've been really enjoying them. And I did read the run of, it's basically Iron Man 163, where Obadiah Stane is introduced through 200 when he becomes Ironmonger. I read through that entire run and I just totally fell in love with it because I was like, this is so dark for a comic book. We have Tony Stark living on the streets. He's a drunk alcoholic, and Rhodey is playing Iron Man for the bulk of that series. And it was such an interesting run of comics. And Obadiah was a really interesting villain, just the way that he kind of played off of all of that and he was basically a competitor of Tony's, another weapons manufacturer, and he got the controlling interest of Stark. And I think my favorite cover of that whole run is the one where it says Stark Industries, and you see this crane dropping in the 2 letters NE over the RK. And so you're getting from Stark to Stane, and I'm like, oh, that's a great way to play with that. And yeah, but he's a great character, and of course we have Jeff Bridges playing him.
Well, I would watch anything Jeff Bridges does, and it's interesting to me that in the movie they took him from being an outright competitor to almost an exasperated father figure at first, at least what we see him with, the part of him that we see, and then that transformation that happens later in the movie is a little bit more a little bit more of a downward spiral after what seems like a guy who's on Tony's side.
Yeah, we are we're keeping ourselves from talking about the later minutes. We're talking about and it's fine bringing them up. We I told Pete our mandate is we can talk about the comics and the minutes before what we've seen, but we're pretending the rest of it we have not seen yet. So
I'm on minute 1 for me, and I already broke the rules.
I should spoil it. We've also broken the rules at minute 1. I think so.
Okay.
We're terrible rule breakers.
I think it's fascinating, and I just want to say, I think as an aside, it feels like for the last 15 years, I haven't seen an interview with Jeff Bridges where he doesn't feel like he is playing a character in a long-running movie where he's just a broken, probably high, guy who's just not. He just feels like he just doesn't care about the rest of the world anymore and what the world thinks about him, etc. And this movie, it feels like a massive transformation to get from Jeff Bridges, how he gets up out of bed every day, into Obadiah Stane, this like bald, strong titan of a man. How does he do that? Like, the actor, how is his body physically capable anymore of making this kind of transformation and cleaning up the way he does? So I love Jeff Bridges. Anything that he does, I'm very excited about. This felt like the least Jeff Bridges character that I feel like I've seen him play in the last 30 years.
I agree. To make a bad pun, in stark contrast to this, I just recently rewatched Tron Legacy, and in that movie, he's kind of a broken guy. He's he's almost like the one line that he said that always sticks with me. He says, "Oh, you're messing with my Zen thing, Sam." And he just seems like a guy who's just trying to have some peace and please stop knocking on his door. And it feels like not even just like a different role. It feels like a different person when you're watching him as Obadiah Stane.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, he feels, in my head, he goes back to like, his Charles Howard character from Seabiscuit.
Yep.
Or something like that, where he's kind of a rich businessman, or even the president when he's in The Contender. Like, that's, to me, is kind of the Obadiah Stane presence that I get from Jeff Bridges here. But yeah, you're right. So much of him, especially recently, he just feels like a different iteration of either the dude or of when he did Rooster Cogburn. Like, that's kind of, the two variations that I see most often from him.
And so that's the funny part, right? That I think he's absolutely terrific as Obadiah Stane. He is terrific as Obadiah Stane. And how would anybody have looked at Jeff Bridges outside of this character and seen, yeah, I think Jeff could do it. Like, I would just never have made that leap.
Yeah, and it's interesting because hearing them talking about it before the film was, when it was still in development and he's been hired and everything, they still are having conversations a little bit about a different character, the Crimson Dynamo, which was a different villain. And I think he was actually set to play Crimson Dynamo. But then I think when they thought about having him as Obadiah with the bald head, they're like, oh yes, he'd be great with that look. And so that's what switched the whole thing to Obadiah Stane and Ironmonger, which is, I can't see it any other way now.
No, true. I agree.
He doesn't actually say anything in this minute. We get a knowing look between Obadiah and poor Rhodey on screen, but mostly he's just there, spotlit next to the empty chair. It's a very religious kind of a spectacle. The empty seat at the Last Supper.
Yeah, and that look is like, what are you going to do? It's Tony.
Yeah. Yep, that's right. Yeah, we've all been here before. That a little bit of that shared understanding. Can we talk a bit about Terrence Howard, since it's Terrence Howard?
Yeah.
Oh, he's a fantastic actor, and this was I think pretty much on the heels of a couple of his bigger movies that came out before this. Hustle and Flow and Crash were two films that he had gotten some good recognition for. And here he is playing Rhodey, and boy, he sounds like he's got a lot of passion for Tony as he speaks here. Rhodey, of course, premiered in Iron Man 118, and then in Iron Man 170 is where he first donned the Iron Man costume, and Iron Man 284 is where he finally becomes War Machine. But initially, when he first was in the comics, he was just a pilot for Tony, and we first meet him. He's prepping the jet copter for him, so it's a very funny way that they've kind of modified the character. But I actually really like that they've boosted him up to be the military liaison for Stark Industries.
Yeah, it's sort of like the transformation they gave to Bucky in the Captain America movies, that you elevate someone in order to have a different dynamic to their characters. And again, with Tony, I think it really works, just like it did with Steve, and that someone like Tony, it's useful to have someone who's his friend and you could tell is loyal to him, but will also get in his face and be like, you're an idiot, and just tell him what's what. And that's a fun dynamic to watch.
It really is. And as we see in this movie, there are fantastic examples of just that, when it is their relationship between these two characters. It is his role, Rhodey's role, as a foil that allows us to learn some very important character beats about Tony. And so again, to that point of efficiency, their relationship is an efficient vehicle to get us in the head of Tony Stark as he makes his transformation.
And you can tell in the speech that he gives that he is very much, to borrow a comic fandom term, he's a true believer in what they're doing for the military, for the country, for the world in general. And you can see that passion. It really comes across in how he introduces Tony.
Well, and that fits well with the whole essence of kind of the creation of Tony Stark and Iron Man in the comics to begin with. That whole idea of that Stan Lee had of let's take this rich playboy character that is everything that the war protesters and the comic book readers are against and turn him into somebody that they'll actually love. And I think that's a really interesting way to play with Rhodey, where he's kind of on that side as well. And it works really well in setting everything up here.
I agree.
We have some music that kicks in here when Rhodey starts talking. It is, of course, the theme song from the old Iron Man TV show that was a part of the Marvel Superheroes, written by Jack Urbont back in the 60s. This is a new arrangement by John O'Brien and Rick Boston. John O'Brien was an old friend of Jon Favreau's, who sadly died in 2011 at the age of 45 in a hotel room. Kind of a sad end. But we're going to hear this kicking in a few times throughout the movie. There I go, breaking the rules again.
Your own rules. I don't.
I know, terrible.
You're fired.
I don't remember this show. Is that crazy? I don't think I ever saw it.
I never knew there was a show. I don't know if it had many repeats or anything, but I don't think I ever saw the Marvel Superheroes TV show.
Me either. In fact, yeah, this was an Easter egg that I was not even aware of until just recently. I don't think I ever saw the show either.
They had a bunch of segments. They had Captain America had his own segments. And it looks like each of them were given 13 episodes. So, I mean, each of them had basically a full season. Captain America, The Incredible Hulk, The Invincible Iron Man, The Mighty Thor, Prince Namor, The Submariner. So those are the characters that had episodes on the show. It's interesting. It's a strange run. I wouldn't have expected The Submariner to pop up in there. But
I was just going to say, wow, I can't wait for Phase 9 when we get the Submariner standalone movie.
Well, we'll see how Aquaman does. Maybe it will spur them on to push him into Phase 4.
That's what we've been waiting for all along. A successful DC movie about the ocean.
Anything else with this minute, you guys?
I think that's all I got for this one.
That's all I got for this one, as ever. I can't wait for minute 7.
Well, that is it for today's show, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe to the show for free at marvelmovieminute.com and join us over on Discord. And you can jump into our chat room there. And you can, of course, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at The Next Reel. If you like what we do, don't forget to also support us over on patreon.com/thenextreel, where you can get some cool stuff and get some additional shows and all that fun stuff. So, Ryan, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Do you have anything you want to plug? Where can people find you? All that good stuff?
Yeah. So I'm Ryan Dalton. In addition to doing voice acting with Legible Scrawl, I'm also an author. I have a sci-fi series out, the Time Shift Trilogy. You can find that pretty much anywhere books are sold, online or in stores. The first one is called The Year of Lightning, and it's a time travel mystery series.
Oh, that sounds right up our alley. That's fantastic.
I know. When are you going to sell the rights, man?
Well,
we'll do a movie. We'll do a show on it.
Wouldn't that be fun? Yeah, I've had a couple of nibbles. Who knows? I'm a little bit small time, but hey, wouldn't that be fun?
That would be fantastic.
We knew you win.
And tell us real quick, what is Legible Scrawl?
So it's started as sort of a collective of people like me who are writers and then other actors who just wanted to get together and do fun podcast stuff like audio dramas and just do interesting things that kind of take chances. And they've branched off into a lot of different original programming shows. And a couple of things that I have been involved in. One was called To Prove a Villain, which is 2 different seasons, and they're both. The first one is set in the DC universe. Second one set in the Marvel universe, and essentially they are recorded interviews with supervillains. And in addition to the recordings, there's also sort of there's a kind of a season arc that you see play out as they progress. And in the Marvel season, I played Wilson Fisk, and in the DC season, I played Lex Luthor. So apparently, I'm good at playing rich megalomaniacs.
Wow, Obadiah Stane is right in your wheelhouse.
I know. Why haven't I played him? I gotta talk to Kyle. He's the main guy behind Legible Scroll, and be like, I guess I got to complete the Trinity and play Stane now.
That's right. That's right.
Well, that is just fantastic. And that's at legiblescrawl.com if people want to learn more about it.
Yeah, and then you can, if you search Legible Scroll, I'm sure you'll be able to pull up a lot of the different shows. There's one called Monday Matinee they do that has a lot of interesting programming, and the catalog continues to grow. Lots of fun listening.
Check that stuff out, and again, don't forget to check us out at marvelmovieminute.com. Until next time, true believers.